The wind screamed through the Colorado mountains like a banshee, and Marcus knew they had maybe 20 minutes before the blizzard claimed both him and Rex. His German shepherd whined against his chest as snow whipped around them in blinding sheets. Most people saw a homeless drifter with his dog, but they didn't know Marcus had spent 15 years as a military archaeologist before PTSD and addiction stole everything from him. When Rex suddenly bolted toward a cluster of rocks, Marcus stumbled after him and found something impossible, a perfectly preserved stone hut, its walls covered in symbols he recognized from classified Pentagon files. Inside, ancient artifacts worth millions lined stone shelves, but it was the modern surveillance equipment hidden in the corner that made his blood run cold. Someone had been guarding this place, someone who knew exactly what these relics meant. And judging by the fresh footprints in the snow outside, they were coming back. But why would anyone hide a fortune in the middle of nowhere, and what were they willing to do to protect it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus pressed his back against the stone wall, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Rex circled the small space, hackles raised, sensing danger his master couldn't yet see. The hut's interior defied everything Marcus thought he knew about this remote section of the Rockies. He'd been wandering these mountains for 3 years since losing his apartment, and he'd never seen anything like this. The symbols carved into the walls weren't random scratches made by bored hikers. These were genuine Anasazi petroglyphs, but mixed with something else, markings he'd only seen once before in a classified dig outside Kandahar. His fingers traced the intricate patterns, muscle memory from his former life kicking in, despite the years of alcohol and self-destruction. On the stone shelves, pottery vessels sat pristine, despite what should have been centuries of exposure. Turquoise jewelry caught the dim light filtering through the single window. A collection of silver artifacts bore the unmistakable craftsmanship of the ancient Pueblones. Any museum would kill for just one piece. Together, this collection represented millions of dollars and immeasurable historical value. But it was the modern equipment that made Marcus's hands shake, and not from the cold. A sophisticated camera system with night vision capabilities sat tucked behind a larger pottery piece. Motion sensors lined the doorway, their red lights blinking silently. Someone had turned this archaeological treasure trove into a high-tech fortress. Rex growled low, his ears perked toward the entrance. Marcus crouched beside his companion, peering through the partially open door. The snowfall had lightened enough to reveal what had spooked the dog. Fresh boot prints led directly to the hut. Size 11 or 12 boots with deep treads, the kind serious hikers wore. But these weren't random wanderers seeking shelter. The prints formed a deliberate pattern, circling the hut before approaching as if someone had been conducting surveillance. Marcus's military training overrode his civilian panic. He quickly scanned the hut for additional exits, finding none. The single door represented their only escape route, but stepping outside meant exposing themselves to whoever was tracking through the snow. His eyes fell on a leather journal tucked between 2 ceramic bowls on the highest shelf. Moving carefully to avoid triggering any additional sensors, he retrieved the journal. The pages contained detailed sketches of each artifact, along with GPS coordinates and dates spanning the last 5 years. Someone had been systematically cataloging this collection, but the handwriting switched between 3 different styles. Multiple people were involved in whatever operation this represented. The final entries made Marcus's blood freeze. Purchase offers from private collectors, shipping manifests to offshore accounts, contact information for black market dealers specializing in Native American artifacts. This wasn't just a hidden collection, it was the hub of an illegal trafficking network. Rex's growl intensified, and Marcus heard what his dog's superior senses had detected first: footsteps crunching through snow, approaching fast, multiple sets of boots moving with military precision. These weren't casual hikers who'd stumbled onto the hut. These were professionals, and they knew exactly what they'd find inside. Marcus stuffed the journal inside his worn coat and grabbed a small turquoise pendant. evidence he might need if he survived the next few minutes. He pressed himself against the wall beside the door, gesturing for Rex to remain silent. Through the gap in the doorway, he could see shadows moving against the white backdrop of snow. A voice called out, muffled by the wind, but clearly audible. Motion sensors triggered 23 minutes ago. Whatever's inside, it's still there. Another voice responded, closer now. Could be an animal seeking shelter. This storm came up fast. Animals don't spend 20 minutes examining our inventory. Someone's been inside long enough to see everything. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of combat stress settling over him. He'd escaped one war only to stumble into another. But this time, Rex's life depended on the skills Marcus thought he'd left buried in the Afghan desert. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. The wind had died to a whisper by dawn, but Marcus knew better than to trust mountain weather. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during 2 tours in Afghanistan, where sudden storms could turn a routine patrol into a fight for survival. Duke stirred beside him, the German shepherd's ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. Marcus sat up slowly, his joints protesting after a night on the stone floor. The ancient hut had saved their lives, no question about it, but something about this place felt wrong. In the pale morning light filtering through the doorway, he could see details that the storm had hidden the night before. The walls weren't just stacked stones. They were fitted together with mathematical precision, each block carved to interlock with its neighbors. No mortar, yet the structure had stood for what looked like centuries. Running his fingers along the nearest wall, Marcus found symbols etched deep into the rock. Not graffiti or casual marks, but deliberate carvings that formed patterns he couldn't decipher. Duke whined softly and padded toward the back corner of the hut, where shadows still lingered despite the growing daylight. The dog's hackles weren't raised, but his body language screamed alertness. Marcus had learned to trust that instinct. It had kept them both alive on more than one occasion since they'd been living rough. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to keep his voice down. The shepherd pawed at what Marcus had assumed was just another section of wall, but as he approached, he realized Duke had found something else entirely. A rectangular stone, darker than the others, sat slightly recessed into the wall at about chest height. The surface was covered in the same mysterious symbols, but these were more elaborate, forming intricate spirals and geometric patterns that seemed to shift in the changing light. Marcus pressed his palm against the stone, surprised to find it warm, despite the morning chill. The moment his skin made contact, he felt a subtle vibration, like the hum of distant machinery. Duke backed away, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The stone moved. Not much. Just a slight depression inward, accompanied by a grinding sound that spoke of ancient mechanisms still functioning after impossible spans of time. Marcus jerked his hand back, but nothing else happened. The stone remained depressed, and now he could see a thin line of deeper darkness around its edges. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just some random shelter built by long-dead shepherds or hunters. This was something else. Something that had been deliberately hidden in one of the most remote places he could imagine. The symbols, the precise construction, the hidden mechanism, it all pointed to secrets that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. A sound from outside froze him in place, not wind this time, but the distinct crunch of footsteps in snow. Duke's growl intensified, and the dog positioned himself between Marcus and the entrance, every muscle tensed for action. Marcus moved carefully to the side of the doorway and peered out. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of fresh powder across the landscape, transforming the rocky slopes into a pristine white canvas. Against that backdrop, the line of boot prints leading toward the hut stood out like a highway billboard. 3 sets of tracks, moving with the steady rhythm of people who knew exactly where they were going. Not lost hikers or casual explorers. These tracks showed purpose and direction. Someone had followed them here, or worse, had known they would end up here. The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus could hear voices now, too distant to make out words, but close enough to distinguish at least 2 different speakers. His mind raced through possibilities. Park rangers checking on storm damage, search and rescue looking for missing persons, or something darker? His instincts, honed by years of combat and months of survival on society's margins, screamed danger. People didn't trek through a killer blizzard to check on the welfare of a homeless vet and his dog. They came for other reasons, and those reasons were rarely good. Duke pressed against his leg, the dog's warmth a reminder that he wasn't alone whatever was about to happen. Marcus looked back at the mysterious stone, still depressed into the wall, still humming with that strange energy. Whatever secret this place held, he had apparently activated something that couldn't be undone. The voices were clearer now, though still muffled by distance and snow. Two men, speaking in clipped, professional tones that reminded him uncomfortably of military communications. Not good Samaritans, then. Marcus grabbed his worn backpack and slung it over his shoulders. The pack contained everything he owned in the world: a sleeping bag, some canned food, a few personal items that had somehow survived his fall from grace. Not much, but enough to keep moving. The question was, moving where? The hut had only one entrance, and the voices were coming from that direction. He was trapped, with Duke depending on him to find a way out of whatever was closing in on them. The storm's fury intensified as Marcus pressed deeper into the cave, Sergeant's wet fur brushing against his leg. The flashlight beam revealed rough-hewn walls that seemed deliberately carved rather than naturally formed. Ancient tool marks scored the stone in precise patterns, and the air carried a metallic scent that made his military-trained senses sharpen with unease. "This ain't no ordinary cave, boy," he whispered to Sergeant, who had stopped panting and now moved with the cautious gait Marcus recognized from their patrols in Afghanistan. The dog sensed something too. 20 feet in, the narrow passage opened into a circular chamber. Marcus swept the flashlight across walls covered in symbols he'd never seen before, not quite Native American, not quite European, but something far older. His breath caught as the beam illuminated the center of the room. A stone pedestal rose from the floor, roughly waist-high, with what appeared to be a metal box resting on top. The container was unlike anything from this century, bronze or copper, green with age, covered in the same mysterious symbols that decorated the walls. Around the pedestal, the floor was littered with modern debris, cigarette butts, empty water bottles, and scattered papers. Someone else had been here, recently. Marcus approached cautiously, his military training overriding his curiosity. Sergeant growled low, hackles raised as he sniffed the air near the scattered refuse. The dog had found something that didn't smell right. Kneeling beside the papers, Marcus discovered photocopied maps of the area, geological surveys, and what looked like archaeological notes written in cramped handwriting. One page caught his attention, a translation key for the symbols on the walls. His hands trembled as he read the translated phrases: "Guardian of the Northern Passage, 7 days hence, and most intriguingly, where copper runs like water beneath stone." The sound of an engine cutting through the blizzard made both man and dog freeze. Headlights swept across the cave entrance, and Marcus quickly extinguished his flashlight, plunging them into complete darkness. He grabbed Sergeant's collar, pulling the dog behind the stone pedestal just as footsteps crunched through the snow outside. "I'm telling you, the old man was here," a gruff voice echoed into the cave. "Tire tracks in the snow, fresh as this morning." "Doesn't matter," replied a second voice, smoother, educated. "We're too close to stop now. 30 years of research, and we finally found the entrance chamber. That homeless drunk isn't going to ruin everything." Marcus's blood chilled. They weren't talking about some random old man. They meant him. But how did they know he was here? And what was this about 30 years of research? The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the harsh white light of powerful LED lanterns. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone, feeling Sergeant's tension through the leash. The dog wanted to protect him, but one wrong move would get them both killed. These men spoke with the casual tone of people accustomed to violence. "The box is still here," said the educated voice with obvious relief. "Thank God. Hand me the translation notes. What if someone already opened it?" "Impossible." Look at the locking mechanism. It's exactly as described in the Fenwick journals, untouched for over a century. Marcus strained to see around the pedestal as the men worked. The smooth-voiced one appeared to be middle-aged, wearing expensive winter gear, while his companion looked like muscle for hire in a cheap parka. They moved with purpose, consulting the papers he'd been reading moments before. According to this, the leader continued, the contents will lead us to the main site. Fenwick's expedition found copper deposits worth millions in today's money, maybe tens of millions. They hid everything here before the winter of 1897 killed them all. So why didn't anyone else find it? Because the government classified all the geological surveys after Fenwick's team disappeared. Took me decades to track down the records and another 5 years to triangulate this location from his coded journal entries. The metallic scraping of ancient mechanisms filled the chamber as they worked on the box. Marcus felt sweat despite the cold, knowing that discovery meant certain death. These men had invested too much to leave witnesses. Sergeant's muscles coiled beneath his hand. The dog had spotted something Marcus couldn't see from their hiding place. A low rumble started deep in the animal's chest. Not quite a growl, but a warning. Did you hear that? The hired muscle had stopped moving. Hear what? Focus on holding this steady. But Marcus heard it too now. Not Sergeant's warning, but something else. A deep, rhythmic sound echoing from somewhere deeper in the cave system, like machinery running far below or water flowing through hidden channels. The box opened with a sharp click that seemed to reverberate through the stone walls. In the sudden silence that followed, even the blizzard outside seemed to pause, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. The storm's fury had subsided to a whisper by dawn, leaving behind a world transformed by pristine snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the early light. Marcus stirred from his makeshift bed near the dying embers, his body stiff from sleeping on stone. Rex lay curled against his side, the dog's warmth having been a blessing through the long, cold night. As consciousness fully returned, so did the memory of what he'd discovered in the darkness. The leather journal sat where he'd left it, its ancient binding seeming almost to pulse with secrets in the pale morning glow filtering through the hut's entrance. Marcus sat up carefully, his joints protesting, and reached for the journal. In the better light, he could make out more details of the cramped handwriting that filled its yellowed pages. The dates he could decipher spanned several months in 1962, and the author appeared to be someone named Dr. Catherine Blackwood. Day 43, he read aloud, his voice hoarse from the cold. The translation is nearly complete. What the consortium doesn't realize is that I've been documenting everything. They think they can use me and then discard me like the others. But I've hidden copies of all my work. The map coordinates, the cipher keys, even the photographs of the artifact chambers. Rex lifted his head, ears perked at the sound of his master's voice. The dog seemed to sense the importance of the moment, remaining perfectly still as Marcus continued reading. The journal entries painted a picture of archaeological intrigue that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Dr. Blackwood had apparently been part of an expedition funded by something called the Consortium, searching for what she referred to as the 7 caches of the northern route. According to her notes, these were depositories of wealth accumulated by fur traders and early prospectors, hidden throughout the wilderness in the 1800s, using an ingenious system of coded markers. They found me because of my work on indigenous pictographs, one entry explained. But they don't know I've cracked more than just their ancient symbols. I know what they did to Professor Morrison when he tried to leave. I know about the accidents that befell the others who asked too many questions. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. His fingers traced the words as he read about hidden symbols carved into seemingly natural rock formations, about astronomical alignments that revealed the locations of treasure caches, and about a conspiracy of wealthy individuals who had been systematically looting these sites for decades. The most intriguing entry was dated just days before the journal's final pages. I've found it. The master cache, the one the old French trader's map called Le Coeur du Nord, the heart of the North, enough wealth to fund a dozen expeditions or to buy a man's silence forever. But they're getting suspicious. I have to move tonight. Marcus flipped through the remaining pages, finding rough sketches of symbols, copied passages in what looked like French and various indigenous languages, and most importantly, a hand-drawn map showing the relative positions of several marked locations. One was circled multiple times and labeled with coordinates that looked surprisingly familiar. He pulled out his battered GPS device, a relic from his military days that still held a charge thanks to its solar panel. Cross-referencing the coordinates with his current location sent a jolt of electricity through his exhausted body. According to Dr. Blackwood's map, he was sitting less than 2 miles from Le Coeur du Nord. Rex suddenly tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest as his attention fixed on the entrance to the hut. Marcus froze, listening intently. Through the stillness of the post-storm morning came a sound that made his blood run cold, the distant rumble of snowmobile engines. Moving quietly to the entrance, Marcus peered out across the white landscape. Far below in the valley he could make out 3 dark figures on machines, moving in a methodical search pattern. Even at this distance, something about their purposeful movement suggested they weren't casual winter recreationists. "Looks like we're not the only ones interested in this place, boy," Marcus whispered to Rex, his mind racing. Could these be descendants of Dr. Blackwood's mysterious consortium? Had his small fire last night been visible from the valley, or was this just an unfortunate coincidence? The journal's final entry provided a chilling possibility. "They've found me. I can hear the dogs in the distance. I'm going to hide this journal and pray someone worthy finds it someday. The truth must survive, even if I don't. The symbols on these walls aren't decorative. They're a map, but you need the cipher to read them. And that's in the artifact itself, hidden where only someone who truly understands the old ways can find it." Marcus looked around the ancient stone walls with new eyes, noticing for the first time that what he'd taken for random scratches and weathering were actually deliberate markings. The hut wasn't just shelter, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The sound of the snowmobiles was getting closer. The leather journal felt heavy in Marcus's hands as he carefully turned its brittle pages, each one threatening to crumble at his touch. Rex lay beside him, occasionally lifting his head to peer at the strange symbols covering the weathered parchment. The storm continued its relentless assault on the stone hut, but Marcus barely noticed the howling wind anymore. His entire focus had narrowed to the cryptic entries sprawling across the journal's yellowed pages. Most of the text appeared to be in English, though written in an archaic style that made comprehension difficult. Scattered throughout were diagrams, sketches of the surrounding landscape, and what looked like mathematical calculations. But it was the recurring symbol that caught his attention, the same spiral pattern carved into the altar stone appearing dozens of times throughout the journal's pages. Property of Ezekiel Thorne, surveyor and cartographer, Marcus read aloud from the first page. Anno Domini 1887. The date sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold. This journal was over a century old, yet it had been preserved remarkably well within the protective walls of the stone structure. As he read further, fragments of Thorne's story began to emerge. The man had been commissioned by a wealthy industrialist from Boston to survey a vast tract of wilderness, ostensibly for a proposed railroad route. But Thorne's private entries revealed a different purpose entirely. Hidden within the technical surveys and topographical notes were references to the old knowledge and markers left by those who came before. Rex suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his throat, and Marcus immediately closed the journal, listening intently. Over the storm's din, he thought he heard something. A distant mechanical sound that didn't belong in this wilderness. The noise came and went with the gusting wind, making it impossible to identify with certainty. "Just the storm, boy," Marcus whispered, though his own instincts were screaming otherwise. Rex wasn't easily spooked, and his senses were far sharper than any human's. If the dog sensed danger, Marcus had learned to trust that judgment implicitly. He reopened the journal and continued reading by the flickering light of his small camp lantern. Thorne's entries grew increasingly excited as he described discovering stone markers aligned with celestial bodies and chambers hewn from living rock. The surveyor had apparently stumbled upon something far older than anyone had expected, evidence of an ancient civilization that had once occupied these mountains. But it was an entry dated October 15th, 1887, that made Marcus's blood run cold. They know. Somehow Morrison's men have learned of my true purpose here, found Jenkins dead this morning, throat cut, my survey notes scattered and searched through. They seek what cannot be bought or sold, what must remain hidden until the time is right, have moved the primary markers as insurance. The spiral path leads to truth, but only for those who understand the old ways. May God forgive me for what I must do to protect this knowledge. The remaining entries were increasingly paranoid and disjointed. Thorne wrote of being hunted, of hiding crucial information, of preparing for those who would come after. The final dated entry was October 23rd, just 8 days later. The snow comes early this year. Perhaps it is Providence. They will not find me before the mountain claims us all. I have left the truth where only the worthy will discover it. The spiral remembers even when men forget. Marcus set the journal aside, his mind reeling. Whatever Thorne had discovered, it had been important enough to kill for, both then and apparently now. The surveyor's references to hidden markers and concealed truth suggested something valuable remained hidden in these mountains, waiting to be found by someone who could interpret his clues. A sudden crack outside made both Marcus and Rex freeze. This time there was no mistaking the sound. It was the sharp report of breaking wood, unmistakably different from the storm's natural chaos. Someone or something was out there, moving through the blizzard toward their shelter. Rex was on his feet now, hackles raised, positioning himself between Marcus and the entrance. The veteran quickly stuffed the journal inside his coat and grabbed his knife, the only weapon he carried. His military training kicked in automatically, evaluating the tactical situation. One entrance, no other exits. Stone walls provided good protection but also created a potential trap. Unknown number of potential hostiles approaching in near-zero visibility conditions. The sound came again, closer now. Definitely footsteps, crunching through snow despite the storm's attempts to muffle all sound. Multiple sets, moving with the careful precision of people trying to approach undetected. Marcus pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, knife ready. Rex remained motionless, every muscle coiled for action. Outside, barely audible over the wind, came the sound of voices. Urgent whispers discussing strategy. These weren't lost hikers seeking shelter. These were hunters who had found their prey. The blizzard's fury had subsided to a steady snowfall by dawn, but Marcus knew better than to venture out immediately. He'd learned patience in the mountains of Afghanistan, where rushing into the unknown meant death. Rex lay curled beside him, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air filtering through gaps in the ancient stones. Marcus examined the carved symbols more carefully in the pale morning light. The deeper grooves formed a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, not random scratches but intentional markings. His fingers traced the weathered lines, feeling the precision of each cut. Someone had spent considerable time creating this message, if that's what it was. "What do you think, boy?" he whispered, scratching Rex behind the ears. "Looks like we stumbled into something bigger than just a storm shelter." Rex whined softly and padded to the entrance, his nose working overtime. The dog's body language shifted, ears perked, muscles tense. Marcus recognized the signs. Rex had detected something or someone nearby. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing loose stones, Marcus peered through a gap in the wall. The snow had accumulated in deep drifts, transforming the landscape into rolling white hills. But there, barely visible through the falling snow, dark shapes moved against the white backdrop. 3 figures, maybe 4, trudging methodically through the drifts in a search pattern. Marcus's blood chilled, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. He'd seen enough military operations to recognize an organized sweep. These weren't casual hikers or rescue workers. They moved with purpose, splitting up to cover more ground while maintaining visual contact with each other. One of the figures stopped and raised what appeared to be binoculars, scanning the area where Marcus and Rex had sought shelter. The man wore dark winter gear, military style, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders. Even at this distance, Marcus could see the deliberate way the man directed his companions. Rex pressed against Marcus's leg, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The dog had excellent instincts about people, and right now those instincts screamed danger. "Easy, Rex," Marcus breathed, his hand finding the reassuring weight of the folding knife in his jacket pocket. It wasn't much against what appeared to be a well-equipped team, but it was something. The searchers were getting closer. Marcus could make out more details now. Expensive cold weather gear, professional equipment, coordinated movements. This wasn't a random encounter. Someone was looking for something specific, and Marcus had a sinking feeling it was connected to their stone shelter. He studied the carved symbols again with new urgency. If these people were willing to search through a blizzard, whatever secret these stones held was worth considerable risk and expense. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. His whole life had been a series of missed opportunities and bad breaks. Could this ramshackle shelter really contain something valuable? The lead searcher had stopped again, this time pointing directly toward their position. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. Had they spotted the smoke from his small fire, left tracks that survived the storm, or did they simply know where to look? Rex's growl intensified. Through the gap, Marcus saw the team change formation, moving from a search pattern to an approach formation. They'd found what they were looking for. Marcus's mind raced through options. The back wall of the hut was solid stone, built into the hillside, no escape route there. The entrance was the only way out, and the searchers were approaching from that direction. He was trapped unless he acted fast. But something made him hesitate. These people had come looking in a specific area after a blizzard, as if they knew exactly where to search. That suggested prior knowledge of the stone hut and its significance, which meant they might have answers to questions Marcus was only beginning to formulate. He pulled out his phone, knowing it had no signal but hoping the camera still worked. Quickly, he photographed the carved symbols from multiple angles, the flash momentarily illuminating the ancient markings. If he didn't make it out of this situation, at least there would be some record of what he'd found. The voices were audible now, muffled by snow and wind, but definitely getting closer. Marcus caught fragments, should be right around, and tracks from yesterday. His pulse quickened. They were tracking him specifically. Rex positioned himself between Marcus and the entrance, every muscle coiled for action. The dog had been with him through the worst times, sleeping rough in doorways and under bridges, enduring cold and hunger without complaint. Marcus wouldn't let anything happen to him. The first dark shape appeared at the entrance, silhouetted against the grey morning sky. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, knife ready, while Rex's growl became a barely contained snarl. "Well, well," a gravelly voice said, stepping into the hut with casual confidence. "Marcus Chen, I presume? We've been looking forward to meeting you." The ancient symbols seemed to pulse in the firelight as Marcus traced them with his finger, their meaning dancing just beyond comprehension. Rex whined softly beside him, ears pricked toward the entrance of the stone hut, where wind howled through the blizzard with renewed fury. "I know, boy. Something's not right about this place." Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter and studied the carved wall more carefully. The symbols weren't random. They formed distinct patterns, almost like a map. 3 sets of concentric circles connected by wavy lines, with what looked like mountains sketched above them. A sudden crack echoed through the hut, different from the storm's natural symphony. Rex's hackles rose as he positioned himself between Marcus and the entrance, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Marcus grabbed the rusted poker from beside the fire pit and moved to the narrow window opening. Through the swirling snow, a beam of light swept across the rocky outcropping. Then another. Flashlights. Someone was out there in the deadly storm searching. "Easy, Rex," Marcus whispered, though his own pulse hammered against his ribs. He'd learned to trust his instincts during 3 tours in Afghanistan, and every nerve screamed danger. Nobody would venture into this blizzard unless they were desperate, or hunting something specific. The lights disappeared, but Marcus remained motionless by the window. 5 minutes passed. 10. Rex's ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds beyond human hearing. Then the dog's body went rigid, his growl deepening to something primal. Footsteps crunched through snow outside, moving with purpose despite the storm. Marcus pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, poker raised. The steps circled the hut once, twice, then stopped directly outside the doorway. "I know you're in there." The voice cut through the wind, male, educated, with an edge of controlled violence. "The smoke from your fire gave you away." Marcus said nothing. Rex remained statue still, every muscle coiled. "My name is Dr. William Hendricks. I believe you've stumbled upon something that belongs to me." The name triggered a memory fragment, something Marcus had read in a newspaper months ago. An archaeologist from the university who'd been dismissed under suspicious circumstances. Something about stolen artifacts and falsified research. "I'm not here to hurt you," Hendricks continued. "I simply need you to come out so we can discuss this rationally. The storm is getting worse. I have supplies, warm clothes, hot food. All I ask is that you forget you ever found this place." Marcus studied the symbols again, pieces clicking together in his mind. The wavy lines weren't rivers, they were underground passages. The circles marked chambers or rooms. This wasn't just shelter, it was part of something much larger. An ancient complex hidden in these mountains for centuries. "Think about it," Hendricks called out. "A man in your situation could use a friend. Someone who understands the value of discretion. I'm prepared to be very generous." The offer hung in the air like bait on a hook. Marcus had been cold and hungry for so long that the promise of warmth and food stirred something desperate in his chest. But Rex's continued alertness kept him anchored. The dog had saved his life more than once by sensing danger Marcus missed. A new sound reached them, the distant rumble of engines fighting through snow. Snowmobiles or ATVs, multiple vehicles approaching despite the treacherous conditions. Hendricks hadn't come alone. "Last chance," Hendricks said, his cultivated politeness developing sharp edges. "My associates are less patient than I am. They have methods of persuasion that you'd find unpleasant." Marcus moved to the back wall of the hut, running his hands over the stones near the symbol map. His fingers found what he'd hoped for, loose mortar around one section. The stones shifted slightly under pressure, another entrance or at least a hiding spot. The engine sounds grew closer. Rex padded to Marcus's side, understanding without words that they needed to move. Marcus worked frantically at the stones, prying them loose with the poker. Cold air rushed through the growing gap, carrying the scent of deeper caves beyond. "Time's up." Hendrix's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. Marcus heard multiple sets of footsteps now, surrounding the hut. He squeezed through the opening he'd created, Rex following immediately. They emerged into a narrow passage carved from living rock, ancient but stable. Marcus pulled some of the loose stones back into position, just as shouts erupted from the main chamber. The passage stretched ahead into darkness, sloping downward into the mountain's heart. Marcus had no flashlight, no supplies, no idea where the tunnel led. But behind them, angry voices echoed as Hendricks and his men discovered the hiding spot. Rex pressed against Marcus's leg, warm and solid in the blackness. Together they began their descent into the mountain's secrets, following a path carved by hands that had turned to dust centuries before either of them was born. The real treasure hunt was just beginning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to amplify every sound. Marcus sat cross-legged on the stone floor, the ancient journal balanced on his knees, while Rex dozed fitfully nearby. The dog's ear twitched at every small noise, a testament to the tension that had settled over them like a shroud since discovering they weren't alone in these mountains. The journal's pages crackled as Marcus turned them, his calloused fingers tracing the faded ink. The previous entry had mentioned coordinates, but this next section revealed something far more unsettling. The handwriting changed abruptly, becoming hurried, desperate. Day 847 since the discovery. They know. Patterson's been asking questions in town, showing photographs of the mine entrance. Had to seal it again, move the markers. The gold will wait. It has to wait. They cannot have it. Not after what we sacrificed to find it. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The entry was dated 3 years ago. Recent enough that whoever wrote it might still be alive, still protecting whatever secret lay buried in these mountains. He read on, the author's paranoia bleeding through every line. Burned the geological surveys today, every map, every chart that might lead them here. But I know Patterson won't give up. He's like a dog with a bone. No offense to the mutts I've seen him with. Money makes men do terrible things. I should know. A chill ran down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The coincidence felt too stark to ignore. His own dog sleeping beside him while reading about another man's paranoid observations. He glanced at Rex, whose dark eyes had opened and were now fixed on the hut's entrance. The next pages detailed an elaborate system of false trails and decoy markers designed to lead treasure hunters in circles through the treacherous mountain terrain. Maps were sketched in the margins, showing routes that ended in cliff faces or dead-end canyons. The author had been methodical in his deception, but also increasingly unhinged. Patterson's team disappeared last month, found their equipment scattered across Boulder Creek, but no bodies. The mountains claimed them, as they claim all who seek what isn't theirs. But I know he sent them. I know he's still watching. Marcus paused, a memory surfacing from his time at the Veterans Center. Old Tom Patterson, who'd sometimes show up with his metal detector and wild stories about lost treasure. Most dismissed him as a harmless eccentric, but the man had always struck Marcus as having an edge beneath his folksy exterior. Patterson had questioned him once about his hiking routes, offering to pay for information about interesting rock formations in the high country. Rex's low growl interrupted his thoughts. The dog was on his feet, hackles raised, staring intently at something beyond the stone walls. Marcus closed the journal and listened, his military training automatically cataloguing every sound. Whined through the pines, the distant call of a hawk, and underneath it all, something else, the rhythmic crunch of boots on snow. Moving carefully to avoid making noise, Marcus crept to the narrow window opening. Through the gap between stones, he caught sight of movement among the trees below. 2 figures in winter gear were ascending the slope, following what looked like a deliberate search pattern. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who knew these mountains well. The taller figure raised something to his face, binoculars, and swept them across the rocky outcropping where the hut sat concealed. Marcus ducked back, his heart hammering. They were being hunted. He gathered the journal and his pack, mind racing through options. The hut's back entrance was partially concealed by fallen rocks, but it would only buy them time. Rex pressed against his leg, sensing the urgency without needing explanation. The journal felt heavy in his hands, weighted with more than just paper and ink. Whatever treasure it described had already cost lives, and now it threatened to cost more. But the coordinates burned in his memory, and the promise of financial security, of being able to care for Rex properly, of having a warm place to sleep, pulled at him with desperate intensity. Outside, voices carried on the thin air, close enough now to make out words. Trail leads up here, fresh prints in the snow before the wind covered them. You sure it's him? Dog tracks alongside human ones. Has to be. Marcus's blood chilled. They weren't just searching randomly, they were hunting him specifically. But how could they know he was here? Unless someone had been watching him long before he'd found this place. He shouldered his pack and moved toward the rear exit, Rex padding silently beside him. The ancient stone seemed to whisper warnings as they passed, centuries of secrets begging to remain buried. But it was too late for that now. Whatever game he'd stumbled into was already in motion, and the only choice left was whether to run or fight. The voices were getting closer. The storm's fury had become a living thing, clawing at the ancient stones with icy fingers that found every crack and crevice. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, feeling the cold seep through the weathered granite as he strained to hear over the wind's howling. Rex remained motionless beside him, ears pricked forward, every muscle coiled with tension. The voices outside grew clearer as the speakers moved closer to the entrance. Marcus counted at least 2 distinct tones, one gruff and impatient, the other measured and calculating. His hand instinctively moved to the carved symbols on the wall behind him, the ones that had revealed the hidden compartment containing the leather-bound journal. "The GPS tracker went dead right around here," the gruff voice said. "Storm's playing hell with the signal, but this is definitely the last known location." "He couldn't have gone far in this weather," replied the second voice, closer now. "A homeless man and his mutt? They're probably frozen solid by now." Marcus felt his jaw clench. The casual dismissal of his life, the assumption that he was disposable, reminded him of too many bureaucrats and officials who had written him off over the years. But these weren't government workers. These were the people who had killed Professor Hartwell, and they were hunting him with sophisticated tracking equipment. The journal pressed against his chest, where he'd tucked it inside his coat. Whatever secrets it contained had already cost one man his life, and Marcus was beginning to understand that the fortune mentioned in the ancient texts came with a price tag written in blood. "There," one of the voices said, much closer now. "See those tracks leading toward that rock formation?" Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. In his desperate flight from the blizzard, he hadn't thought to cover their trail. The snow had been falling so heavily that he'd assumed it would erase their passage, but apparently enough traces remained to lead their pursuers directly to the hut's entrance. Rex's low growl vibrated through the air, barely audible but filled with warning. Marcus placed a gentle hand on the dog's flank, feeling the animal's readiness to fight despite his injuries. The loyalty in that simple gesture strengthened Marcus's resolve. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let them harm his companion. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the storm, sweeping across the entrance to their shelter. Marcus held his breath, knowing that discovery was only moments away. The ancient hut had saved them from the blizzard, but now it threatened to become their tomb. "Well, well," the gruff voice said with obvious satisfaction. "Looks like our vagrant friend found himself a cozy little hideout." Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, approaching the narrow opening. Marcus scanned the interior desperately, looking for another way out, but the stone walls offered no alternatives. The hut had been built as a shelter, not a fortress, and certainly not an escape route. The flashlight beam penetrated deeper into the hut, and Marcus knew they had seconds before being spotted. He pulled the journal from his coat and quickly stuffed it into a crack between 2 stones, covering it with loose debris. Whatever happened to him, the knowledge it contained might still serve some purpose if it remained hidden. Come out, wherever you are," the second voice called mockingly. "We know you're in there, soldier boy. Make this easy on yourself." The casual use of his military background sent a chill down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. These people knew exactly who he was, had been tracking him specifically. This wasn't a random encounter or a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had become a target the moment he'd discovered the hut and its secrets. Rex tensed beside him, sensing the approaching threat. The dog's breathing came in sharp puffs, visible in the frigid air, and Marcus could see the animal calculating distances and angles, just as he'd been trained to do in combat situations. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't helpless. The first figure appeared at the entrance, silhouetted against the swirling snow. He was large and heavily dressed, carrying what looked like a military-grade assault rifle. Behind him, a second shadow moved with predatory patience. "There you are," the man said, raising his weapon. "Dr. Vance sends his regards." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Dr. Edmund Vance. He remembered that name from Professor Hartwell's notes, references to a colleague who had become obsessed with certain archaeological discoveries. a man who had disappeared from academic circles years ago, only to resurface in whispered conversations about private expeditions and mysterious funding sources. As the rifle's barrel swung toward him, Marcus realized that he had stumbled into something far larger than a simple treasure hunt. The ancient hut, the coded journal, Professor Hartwell's murder, they were all pieces of a puzzle that stretched back decades, possibly centuries. And at the center of it all was a man who would kill anyone who threatened to expose his secrets. Time slowed as Marcus prepared to fight for his life. The blizzard had finally begun to subside when Marcus heard the distant rumble of engines cutting through the mountain silence. He pressed himself against the stone wall of the hut, peering through a crack in the ancient mortar. 3 snowmobiles emerged from the white veil like predatory insects, their headlights sweeping across the landscape in methodical patterns. Rex growled low in his throat, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the cramped space. Marcus placed a calming hand on the dog's flank, feeling the coarse fur bristle under his palm. The carved symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy in the flickering light of their dying fire. "Quiet, boy," Marcus whispered, his combat instincts flooding back with crystalline clarity. The way the riders moved spoke of military training, coordinated, efficient, deadly. These weren't random treasure hunters who had stumbled onto the same discovery. Someone had sent them. The lead snowmobile stopped 50 yards from the hut. A figure in white camouflage dismounted, removing a helmet to reveal a weather-beaten face Marcus recognized from another life. Colonel Garrett Voss, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for selling military intelligence. The man who had tried to frame Marcus's unit for war crimes when his own corruption came to light. Marcus's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a coincidence. Voss had been tracking him, waiting for the right moment. But how could he have known about the hut? The answer came as Sarah's voice carried across the wind, pleading and desperate. They had her bound between 2 of the snowmobiles, her photographer's vest torn and muddy. She must have tried to follow him into the storm when the weather worsened. Marcus cursed himself for leaving her behind at the ranger station. "I know you're in there, Sergeant Torres," Voss called out, his voice carrying the same arrogant authority that had made Marcus's skin crawl during their court-martial proceedings. "You always were good at finding holes to hide in." Marcus checked his rifle, still 3 rounds in the chamber. Against 3 armed men in open terrain, the odds were suicidal. But the hut held advantages. The narrow entrance created a bottleneck, and the thick stone walls would stop most small arms fire. More importantly, he now understood what the symbols meant. During the long night, while studying the intricate carvings by firelight, Marcus had recognized elements from his grandfather's stories, tales of Spanish conquistadors who had hidden their stolen Aztec gold in these mountains 4 centuries ago. The symbols weren't just decorative. They were a map leading deeper into the mountain's heart. "Let the woman go, Voss," Marcus shouted back. "This is between us." Laughter echoed off the stone peaks. "Oh, but she's so much more useful than you realize. Miss Chen here has been documenting your little adventure quite thoroughly. Her photographs will make excellent evidence of your tragic death in an avalanche." Sarah struggled against her bonds, trying to speak through the gag. One of Voss's men backhanded her casually, and white-hot rage flared in Marcus's chest. Rex sensed his master's fury and pressed closer, ready for battle. Marcus studied the terrain with a tactician's eye. The storm had deposited massive snowdrifts around the hut, creating natural fortifications. But it had also made the slopes unstable. The rumble of the snowmobile engines might be enough to trigger a slide if positioned correctly. "You killed my men in Afghanistan," Voss continued, his voice growing closer. "Thought you could ruin my reputation and walk away clean. But I've been patient, Marcus, waiting for you to surface somewhere remote enough that your disappearance wouldn't raise questions." "Your men died because they were torturing civilians," Marcus called back, buying time as he formulated a plan. "And you've been selling intelligence to insurgents. Ancient history." What matters now is that you found something valuable in that pile of rocks. My employer is very interested in pre-Columbian artifacts, particularly ones that might lead to larger discoveries. The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. Voss wasn't working alone. Someone with serious resources was backing this operation. Someone who had been monitoring archaeological sites and had traced the same legends that brought Marcus to this mountain. Marcus looked at Rex, seeing the absolute trust in those amber eyes. They had survived worse odds together in the desert. This time, they had home field advantage. "Your move, Sergeant," Voss taunted. "Come out peacefully, and the woman dies quickly." Marcus smiled grimly as he noticed something Voss had missed in his arrogance. The symbols on the wall weren't just a map, they were a warning. The hut hadn't been built as a shelter, it was a marker indicating the entrance to something far more dangerous than a simple treasure cache. He began working loose one of the ancient stones, revealing a dark passage that descended into the mountain's depths. Cold air rushed up from the opening, carrying with it the scent of vast underground spaces. The real adventure was about to begin. The ancient symbols seemed to pulse with their own inner light as Marcus traced each carving with trembling fingers. The stone felt warm beneath his touch, impossibly warm for something that had been buried in ice for centuries. Ranger whined softly, pressing against his leg as if sensing the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. "It's a map," Marcus whispered, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not just any map, but a detailed layout of underground passages that seemed to stretch for miles beneath the mountain. At the center, where several tunnels converged, was a symbol he'd seen before, the same intricate design that adorned the walls of the stone hut. The sound of approaching snowmobiles cut through the silence like a blade. Marcus's military training kicked in immediately. He extinguished his flashlight and pressed himself against the tunnel wall, pulling Ranger close. The dog remained perfectly still, understanding the danger without needing commands. Through the opening above, he could hear voices, at least 3 distinct speakers. One voice made his blood run cold. Sarah Chen, the woman who'd claimed to be a documentary filmmaker, who'd seemed so genuinely interested in his story just days ago. But the tone was different now, cold and calculating. "The readings are strongest here," she was saying. "Whatever's down there, it's significant. The ground-penetrating radar shows extensive caverns." "How long have you known about this place?" another voice asked, male, with a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. "My grandfather's journal mentioned it, but I never believed the stories until the satellite imagery picked up the anomalies. 3 generations my family has searched for this." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Sarah hadn't found him by accident. She'd been watching, waiting, using him to lead her to something she'd been hunting her entire life. The bitter taste of betrayal filled his mouth. "The old man and his mutt served their purpose," the third voice said. "Should we eliminate them?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "If there are traps or obstacles below, better to let them spring them first. We follow at a distance." Marcus's jaw clenched. He'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, only to be hunted like an animal in his own country. But this time, he had advantages they didn't know about. He understood these mountains, and he had Ranger. Moving silently through the tunnel, he followed the carved map deeper into the mountain's heart. The passages were clearly man-made, carved with precision that spoke of incredible skill and patience. Every 50 feet or so, small alcoves held what appeared to be ancient oil lamps, their wicks long since crumbled to dust. As he descended, Marcus began to understand the scope of what he discovered. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was an entire underground complex. The air grew warmer as they went deeper, and he could hear the distant sound of running water. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took his breath away. His flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls, but what he could see defied belief. Carved columns stretched upward into darkness, each one covered in the same intricate symbols, and there, in the center of the space, sat something that made his heart pound. A stone altar, but not the kind meant for sacrifice. This was clearly designed to display something precious. Around its base, scattered as if dropped in haste, lay dozens of leather pouches. Marcus approached carefully, Ranger at his side. The first pouch he opened contained rough gemstones that caught his flashlight beam and threw back rainbow fire. The second held what appeared to be raw gold nuggets. The third contained something even more valuable, perfectly preserved documents wrapped in oiled leather. As he carefully unfolded the first document, Marcus realized he was looking at land deeds dating back to the 1800s, deeds to properties that were now worth millions, maybe billions of dollars. Mining claims, water rights, entire sections of what was now prime real estate in Denver and Colorado Springs. The sound of movement in the tunnel behind him sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. They'd found the entrance. He had maybe 10 minutes before Sarah and her team reached the chamber. Quickly, he stuffed as many documents and gems as he could into his backpack, but as he prepared to leave, Ranger began sniffing around the altar's base, whining urgently. Following the dog's lead, Marcus discovered a hidden compartment in the altar's side. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with careful handwriting in multiple languages. The first page was in English, and the words made his blood run cold. If you are reading this, then the Chen family has finally found what they've been seeking. But they do not know the true cost of their greed. The guardian of this place demands a price for its treasures, a price written in blood. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel, growing closer. Marcus closed the journal and slipped it into his jacket. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever price it demanded, he was about to find out. The wind howled through the valley like a banshee as Marcus crouched behind the fallen pine tree, Ranger pressed against his side. Through the swirling snow he could make out the dark silhouettes of two figures approaching the stone hut. His heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized the deliberate, predatory movements of trained killers. "Should have known the old bastard wouldn't come alone," Marcus whispered into Ranger's ear. The dog's muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring at his master's command. The larger of the two figures gestured toward the hut's entrance, while the smaller one circled around to the back. Marcus counted 3 weapons between them, assault rifles and what looked like enough gear to siege a small fortress. These weren't desperate treasure hunters. They were professionals. Sarah's voice crackled through the radio clipped to his jacket. "Marcus, do you copy? We're about 10 minutes out, but this storm is getting worse." He couldn't risk responding. The slightest sound would give away his position, and he'd already pushed his luck too far by staying to observe. But something about the way the intruders moved told him 10 minutes might be 9 minutes too long. The larger man produced a device that Marcus didn't recognize, some kind of electronic scanner. As he swept it across the hut's ancient stones, it emitted a series of soft beeps that carried on the wind. They weren't just here for the gold he and Sarah had discovered. They were looking for something specific. Marcus thought back to the strange symbols they'd found carved into the inner walls, the ones that seemed to tell a story beyond mere treasure. Sarah had photographed everything before they'd left to get proper excavation equipment. Had they missed something crucial? The scanner's beeping intensified near the eastern wall, where Marcus remembered seeing the most elaborate of the carvings. The smaller figure joined his partner, and together they began examining the stones with methodical precision. One of them spoke, but the wind carried away the words. Ranger's low growl vibrated through Marcus's chest. The dog had spotted something he'd missed, a third figure emerging from the tree line to the south. This one moved differently, older and more careful, but with an authority that made the other two snap to attention. Even through the blizzard, Marcus recognized the man's distinctive limp. Colonel Harrison Vance, his former commanding officer, the man who'd left him and his unit to die in that god-forsaken valley in Afghanistan. The man who'd covered up the botched operation that had cost Marcus everything. "Son of a bitch," Marcus breathed. Vance approached the hut and gestured sharply at his men. One of them handed him the scanner, and he began his own sweep of the walls. When he reached the spot where Marcus and Sarah had found the hidden chamber, the device went silent. Vance's face split into a cold smile visible even through the snow. The radio crackled again. "Marcus, we can see the smoke from your signal fire. Sarah's got the sheriff with her. Whatever you do, don't engage until we arrive." But Vance was already directing his men to place what looked suspiciously like explosive charges around the hut's foundation. They weren't planning to excavate whatever was hidden inside. They were going to destroy it, along with any evidence of their presence. Marcus made his decision. He pressed his lips to Ranger's ear. "Remember the drill, boy. Create chaos, then get clear." The dog's tail twitched once in acknowledgement. Marcus counted to 3, then hurled a chunk of ice toward the western slope. It clattered against the rocks, instantly drawing the attention of one of Vance's men. As the soldier moved to investigate, Marcus sent Ranger in a wide circle to approach from the opposite direction. The German shepherd exploded from the undergrowth like a fury of fangs and muscle, taking down the demolitions expert before the man could cry out. The charges scattered across the snow as Marcus burst from his hiding spot, tackling the second soldier and sending his rifle spinning into the darkness. "Hello, Marcus." Vance's voice cut through the storm like a blade. "Still playing the hero, I see." Marcus rolled to his feet, keeping his hands visible but ready. The colonel stood 20 feet away, his own weapon trained steadily on Marcus's chest. Behind him, Ranger held the fallen soldier pinned, growling low in his throat. "Funny how you always show up when there's something valuable to steal," Marcus replied. "Just like old times." "This is bigger than you understand, soldier. That hut contains information that could topple governments. The gold is just a bonus." "Information about what?" Vance's smile widened. "About why your unit was really sent to that valley. About what we found there. About why certain secrets need to stay buried." The distant rumble of approaching vehicles echoed through the valley. Sarah and the sheriff were closing fast, but Marcus could see Vance calculating the same timeline. "Time's up, Colonel," Marcus said. "Indeed it is." The wind had died to an eerie whisper by the time Marcus regained consciousness. His head throbbed where the rifle butt had connected, and dried blood crusted his temple. The ancient stone chamber felt different now, colder, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves had witnessed too much violence. Rex lay motionless beside him, a dark stain spreading beneath the dog's fur. Marcus's heart lurched as he crawled forward, his bound hands making movement clumsy. The rope cut into his wrists with each motion, but he didn't care. When his fingers found the steady rise and fall of Rex's breathing, relief flooded through him. "Easy, boy," he whispered, examining the wound. The bullet had grazed Rex's shoulder, painful but not fatal. The dog's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Marcus with that unwavering loyalty that had sustained them both through countless hardships. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. Marcus forced himself to remain still, feigning unconsciousness as 2 figures emerged from the shadows. The first was the man who'd attacked them, tall, lean, with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to violence. Behind him came another figure that made Marcus's blood run cold. Sheriff Hayes stepped into the chamber, his badge catching the dim light filtering through the ancient ventilation shafts. The man Marcus had trusted, had confided in about their discovery, wore an expression of cold calculation. "You hit him too hard," Hayes said, nudging Marcus with his boot. "We need him conscious for this to work." "He'll wake up," the other man replied. His voice carried a slight accent, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "The question is whether he'll cooperate." Hayes knelt beside the carved symbols Marcus had been studying earlier. His fingers traced the intricate patterns with surprising familiarity. 30 years I've been protecting this secret. 30 years of making sure no one got too close to the truth. Your father's debt to my organization runs deep, Sheriff. The Romano family has been patient, but patience has its limits." Marcus processed this revelation through his pounding headache. The Romano family, he'd heard that name whispered in the darker corners of military intelligence. Old money, older connections, the kind of people who collected secrets like others collected stamps. The homeless problem in this county wasn't an accident, Hayes continued, his voice taking on the tone of confession. Every drifter, every veteran who might stumble across this area, we made sure they moved along. Usually money was enough, sometimes it required more permanent solutions. Rex stirred beside Marcus, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The dog's instincts remained sharp despite his injury. "Ah, our guests are rejoining us," the Romanian said. "Good. We have business to discuss." Marcus opened his eyes slowly, meeting Hayes's gaze. "How long?" "Since before you were born, soldier boy. My father found this place in 1963, thought he'd struck it rich. Turns out the Romano family had been tracking the location for generations. They offered him a partnership, help them extract what's hidden here, get a small cut of something worth more than this entire state." The Romanian produced an ornate key from his coat, its metal black with age. "Your ancestor was clever, Mr. Chen, but not clever enough. The Romano family's been patient, methodical. We knew eventually someone with the bloodline would appear." "I'm not related to anyone named Chen," Marcus said, confusion cutting through his anger. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus Chen isn't your real name, is it? The military records we found tell a different story. Your grandmother's maiden name was Chen, descended from the Chinese workers who helped hide this treasure during the railroad construction." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The military had changed his identity after a classified operation went wrong, given him a new background, new papers. But they'd used fragments of his real family history, thinking it would help him remember his cover story. "The symbols you've been studying," the Romanian continued, "they're not just decorative, they're a genetic lock. Requires someone with the right bloodline to activate." He held up the key. "This opens the first chamber, but the real treasure requires something more biological." Rex struggled to his feet, swaying but determined. The dog positioned himself between Marcus and their captors, hackles raised despite his injury. "Here's what's going to happen," Hayes said, drawing his sidearm. "You're going to help us open what your ancestor sealed. In return, we'll make your death quick. Refuse, and your dog dies slowly while you watch." Marcus met Rex's eyes, seeing his own determination reflected there. They'd survived Afghanistan together, lived through the hell of the streets together. If this was where their journey ended, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, as a team. The ancient stone seemed to pulse around them, holding secrets that men had killed for across generations. But Marcus had learned something in the war that Hayes and his partner had forgotten. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one with nothing left to lose. The wind howled like a banshee across the frozen mountainside as Marcus pressed himself against the rocky outcropping, his breath forming ice crystals in the bitter air. Beside him, Rex's ears were pinned back, his dark eyes scanning the tree line below where shadows moved with deadly purpose. They had been running for 3 hours since escaping the cabin, but their pursuers were relentless. Marcus clutched the leather satchel containing the stone tablets closer to his chest. The ancient symbols seemed to burn through the material, a constant reminder of the weight he carried. Dr. Helena Voss wanted these artifacts badly enough to kill for them, and she had the resources to hunt him across the entire mountain range. "Easy, boy," he whispered to Rex, whose low growl indicated approaching danger. Through the swirling snow, Marcus could make out the distinctive red jackets of Voss's mercenaries moving methodically up the slope. They were using military search patterns, sweeping the terrain in coordinated grids. His old army training told him exactly what they were doing, and it wasn't good. The blizzard that had initially seemed like a curse now felt like a blessing. The heavy snowfall would mask their tracks, but it also made navigation treacherous. Marcus knew these mountains well enough from his weeks of wandering, but in whiteout conditions, even familiar territory became a maze of death traps. A sharp crack echoed through the air, followed by the distinctive whine of a rifle bullet striking stone inches from his head. Marcus dove behind a larger boulder, pulling Rex with him as more shots peppered their position. The mercenaries had spotted them, and subtlety was no longer an option. "This way." Marcus hissed, scrambling along the rocky ledge that curved around the mountainside. His injured leg screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Rex bounded ahead, his superior senses guiding them through the maze of stone and snow. They emerged onto a narrow ridge that Marcus recognized with a jolt of hope. Below them, barely visible through the storm, was the ancient stone hut where this entire nightmare had begun. If they could reach it, the thick walls might provide adequate cover, and Marcus knew the terrain around it intimately. The descent was treacherous. Ice-covered rocks threatened to send them tumbling into the abyss with every step. Behind them, shouts in multiple languages indicated their pursuers were closing the gap. Marcus could hear at least 4 distinct voices, which meant Voss had committed significant resources to retrieving the tablets. Halfway down the slope, Rex suddenly veered left, barking urgently. Marcus followed without question, trusting the dog's instincts that had saved them multiple times already. They slid behind a natural windbreak, just as automatic weapons fire erupted from above, sending chips of granite flying in all directions. "They're trying to pin us down," Marcus muttered, recognizing the tactical pattern. 2 shooters were providing covering fire while the others moved to flank their position. It was a classic maneuver, one he had used himself in Afghanistan. The irony wasn't lost on him that military tactics he had once employed to protect his country were now being used against him by foreign mercenaries on American soil. Rex's ears perked up, and he looked toward the stone hut with intense focus. Marcus followed his gaze and saw something that made his blood run cold. Smoke was rising from the ancient structure's chimney. Someone was already there, waiting for them. The pieces clicked together in his mind with horrible clarity. Dr. Voss hadn't just been chasing them randomly across the mountains. She had been herding them, driving them back to the one place she knew they would eventually return to. The stone hut was both sanctuary and trap, and Marcus had walked right into her web. A new voice carried across the wind, cultured and confident despite the howling storm. Dr. Helena Voss herself had come to claim her prize personally. Marcus couldn't make out her exact words, but the tone was unmistakably that of someone who believed they held all the advantages. Rex pressed against his leg, offering what comfort he could. The dog's loyalty never wavered, even when facing impossible odds. Marcus reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears, drawing strength from that unwavering bond. They had survived worse situations together, though admittedly never against opponents this well-funded and ruthless. The sound of approaching footsteps crunched through the snow from 3 different directions. Marcus checked his ammunition and found only 6 rounds remaining in the pistol he had taken from the cabin. Against at least 4 armed professionals, it wouldn't be nearly enough for a direct confrontation. But Marcus hadn't survived 2 tours of duty and months on the streets by playing fair. He had advantages they didn't know about, intimate knowledge of this terrain, desperation born of having nothing left to lose, and a 4-legged partner whose senses far exceeded human limitations. The ancient stone hut waited below them like a monument to secrets that had remained buried for centuries. In minutes, those secrets would either make Marcus rich beyond imagination or become his tomb. The ancient chamber trembled as another explosion echoed from somewhere deep within the mountain. Dust cascaded from the ceiling while Marcus pressed his back against the cold stone wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. Beside him, Rex growled low, ears pinned back as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. "They're closing in fast," Sarah whispered, clutching the leather satchel containing the decoded maps and documents they'd discovered. The treasure's location was finally within their grasp, but so was death. Marcus peered around the corner of the corridor, spotting the dancing shadows of flashlight beams. At least 3 men, maybe more, moving with military precision through the labyrinthine passages. The same men who had murdered Professor Kellerman and burned down the research facility. The same men who would stop at nothing to keep the Anasazi gold buried forever. There, Marcus pointed toward a narrow opening barely visible in the far wall. That passage leads deeper into the mountain. If the professor's translations are correct, the main chamber should be just beyond. Sarah nodded, but her face was pale in the dim light of their failing flashlight. What if it's a dead end? Then we make our stand there. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition, 4 bullets left in the .38 revolver he'd taken from one of their pursuers, not nearly enough for a prolonged firefight. They moved silently across the chamber, Rex padding alongside them with his nose twitching at every scent. The dog had been invaluable in navigating these passages, somehow sensing which paths were safe and which led to dangerous drop-offs or unstable sections. The narrow opening was even tighter than it had appeared. Marcus had to turn sideways to squeeze through, and Sarah barely managed with the satchel pressed against her chest. Rex, despite his size, slipped through with ease, disappearing into the darkness ahead. Beyond the opening, the passage widened into a natural tunnel carved by centuries of water flow. Strange symbols covered the walls, the same Anasazi markings they'd been following since entering the mountain complex 3 hours ago, but these were different, more elaborate, as if marking something of supreme importance. The tunnel curved sharply to the left, then opened into a vast cavern that took their breath away. Their flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling, but what it did illuminate made Sarah gasp aloud. Gold, everywhere. Stacked along the walls were ingots, ornate vessels, and ceremonial objects that caught their light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a treasure chamber of impossible proportions. Centuries of accumulated wealth from the most sophisticated pre-Columbian civilization in North America. My God, Sarah breathed. There's enough here to fund a dozen universities. The historical significance alone. A sharp whistle from Rex cut her off. The dog stood at attention near the chamber entrance, hackles raised. They were no longer alone. Marcus doused the flashlight immediately, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, they could hear the scrape of boots against stone, the harsh breathing of men pushing through the narrow passage they'd just navigated. "Spread out when you reach the chamber," a voice commanded. Marcus recognized it, the same man who'd led the attack on Kellerman's office. They can't have gone far. Light began to filter into the cavern as their pursuers approached. Marcus pulled Sarah behind a stack of golden vessels, motioning for Rex to stay low. The dog obeyed instantly, though every muscle in his body remained coiled for action. 3 men emerged into the chamber, their tactical flashlights sweeping methodically across the walls. When the beams hit the treasure, even these hardened killers stopped in amazement. "Jesus Christ," one muttered. "It's all here. After 30 years of searching, it's actually all here." "Secure the area first," the leader snapped. "We clean up this mess, then we worry about cataloging the find. Corporate wants 0 loose ends this time." Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him. Corporate. This wasn't just about treasure hunters or black market antiquities dealers. They were dealing with something much larger, much more organized, a corporation with enough resources to track them across 3 states and enough ruthlessness to murder anyone who threatened their secret. One of the men was moving in their direction, his light beam sweeping closer to their hiding spot. Marcus raised the revolver, knowing that once he fired, their position would be revealed. 4 bullets against 3 armed professionals in a confined space. The odds were not encouraging, but Rex had other ideas. The dog burst from concealment like a furry missile, hitting the nearest gunman in the chest and driving him backward into his companion. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and clattering weapons, their flashlights spinning across the cavern floor and throwing wild shadows on the walls. Marcus was moving before the men hit the ground, Sarah right behind him. The chamber's exit lay on the opposite side, barely visible in the chaotic light. If they could reach it, if they could lose themselves in the deeper tunnels beyond, they might still have a chance. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the mountain air like a mechanical vulture circling its prey. Marcus pressed himself against the rocky outcropping, his breathing shallow as he watched the aircraft make another pass over the valley below. Beside him, Rex's ears were pinned back, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, his hand finding the dog's head. They're not looking for us. Not yet. But even as he said it, Marcus knew it wasn't entirely true. Dr. Helena Voss had resources he could barely comprehend, and the death of her security team leader would not go unanswered. The storm had bought him time, but now the skies were clearing, and with them his window of escape was rapidly closing. The ancient medallion felt heavy in his jacket pocket, its carved symbols seeming to burn against his chest through the fabric. 3 days had passed since he'd fled the stone hut with the artifact that Voss had killed for. 3 days of moving through treacherous mountain terrain, with only Rex and his military survival training keeping them alive. The helicopter banked sharply and headed north, its sound fading into the distance. Marcus waited another 10 minutes before emerging from his hiding spot. The valley spread out before him, a patchwork of snow and exposed granite that offered little cover but led down toward civilization, and hopefully sanctuary. "What do you think, Rex?" he asked, studying the terrain. "Straight down or take the long way around?" Rex's response was interrupted by the distant crack of a rifle. The bullet struck the rock face inches from Marcus's head, sending stone fragments flying. Without hesitation, he dove behind a boulder, pulling Rex with him. "Marcus Kane!" the voice echoed across the valley, electronically amplified. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Marcus recognized the voice. Dr. Voss herself had come to finish what her men had started. He risked a quick glance around the boulder and spotted 3 figures positioned on the ridge above, their winter camouflage blending seamlessly with the snowy landscape. "The medallion belongs in a museum, not in some private collector's vault," Marcus shouted back, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "That artifact is worth more than your small mind can comprehend," Voss replied. "It's part of a collection that has taken me decades to assemble. Hand it over, and I might let you walk away from this mountain alive." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of the offer. He'd seen what Voss was capable of, had watched her execute her own employee without hesitation when the man had outlived his usefulness. There would be no walking away, not for him, and certainly not for Rex. He checked his position, calculating angles and distances with the tactical precision drilled into him during his tours overseas. The medallion might be priceless, but it was worthless if he was dead. More importantly, Rex deserved better than to die on this frozen mountain because his human had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple shelter from a storm. Another shot rang out, this one closer. They were moving, trying to flank his position. Marcus had perhaps minutes before they had him surrounded. "Rex, listen to me," he said softly, turning to face the dog whose loyalty had never wavered through homelessness, addiction, and now mortal danger. He pulled the medallion from his pocket, its surface gleaming dully in the afternoon light. The carved symbols seemed to shift and dance, telling a story of ancient peoples and forgotten treasures. Quickly, Marcus wrapped the artifact in a piece of cloth torn from his shirt and secured it to Rex's collar with paracord from his backpack. "You're faster than me, boy. Smarter too, probably." Rex whined softly, sensing something was wrong. "I need you to run," Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Remember the trail we took yesterday? The one that leads down to the ranger station? You go there, find people. They'll help you." The sound of boots crunching through snow was getting closer. Marcus peered around the boulder again and saw 2 of Voss's men working their way down the slope, their rifles trained on his position. "When I move, you run the other way," he told Rex. "Don't look back, don't come back for me, just run." For a moment, man and dog stared at each other, and Marcus could swear he saw understanding in those intelligent brown eyes. Then he was moving, bursting from cover with a shout that echoed across the valley, drawing all attention to himself as Rex bounded away in the opposite direction. The rifles cracked in unison, but Marcus was already rolling, seeking new cover, buying precious seconds for his companion to escape. Behind him, he caught a glimpse of Rex's dark form disappearing into a stand of pine trees, the ancient medallion and its secrets racing towards safety on 4 legs. Now, it was just Marcus against the mountain, and Dr. Helena Voss's relentless pursuit of a treasure that had already cost too many lives. The gunshot echoed through the stone chamber like thunder, and Marcus felt the bullet graze his shoulder as he dove behind the ancient altar. Rex barked furiously, his hackles raised as he faced down the figure silhouetted in the chamber's entrance. "You should have stayed lost in that blizzard," Dr. Helena Voss called out, her voice carrying the cultured accent that Marcus now remembered from years ago. She stepped into the flickering torchlight, her expedition gear pristine despite the storm outside. It would have been so much cleaner. Marcus pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder, his mind racing. Voss had been Professor Whitmore's research partner 20 years ago, before the expedition that supposedly killed everyone except Whitmore himself. Now Marcus understood why the old professor had lived as a hermit, paranoid and afraid. "You killed them all, didn't you?" Marcus said, keeping low behind the stone barrier. "The entire expedition. They were going to publish everything," Voss replied, moving slowly into the chamber, her pistol trained on his hiding spot. "Do you have any idea what this place is worth, what these artifacts could bring on the private market?" Whitmore understood eventually. He kept his mouth shut for 2 decades. Rex growled low, positioning himself between Voss and Marcus. The dog's intelligence shone in his eyes as he assessed the threat, waiting for the right moment. "Until he told me," Marcus said, remembering the professor's final words in the hospital. Whitmore hadn't been rambling about treasure. He'd been trying to warn Marcus about Voss. "That sentimental old fool." Voss laughed bitterly. "He actually felt guilty about what we did. Said you reminded him of his son. That's why I had to accelerate my timeline." Marcus's blood chilled. "You're the one who put him in the hospital." A gentle push down some icy steps. At his age, accidents happen so easily. She moved closer, her boots scraping against the stone floor. "He was going to ruin everything by giving you that map." The ancient chamber seemed to pulse around them, the carved symbols on the walls catching the torchlight. Marcus could see the leather satchel containing the real treasure map lying just beyond his reach, knocked loose when he dove for cover. 20 years of secrets and murder, all for the promise of gold that might not even exist anymore. "The funny thing is," Marcus said, buying time as he gauged the distance to the satchel, "I don't even care about the treasure. I just wanted to understand what Whitmore was trying to tell me." "How noble," Voss sneered, "the penniless veteran with principles. But you've seen too much now. You know what this place is, where it's located. I can't let you leave." Marcus caught Rex's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the satchel. The dog's ears perked up, understanding flooding his intelligent gaze. They'd worked together on dangerous missions before. This was just another battlefield. "There's something you should know about the treasure," Marcus said loudly, drawing Voss's attention. "Whitmore figured out something you missed." "What are you talking about?" Despite herself, Voss hesitated. The inscription above the altar. "You never learned to read the ancient script as well as he did." Marcus prepared to move. "It's not marking a treasure vault, it's a warning." As Voss glanced instinctively toward the carved symbols, Rex sprang into action. The German shepherd launched himself not at Voss, but at the leather satchel, grabbing it in his jaws and sliding it across the smooth stone floor to Marcus. Voss spun back, firing wildly, but Marcus was already rolling, clutching the satchel as he sought cover behind another stone pillar. The ancient chamber erupted in gunshots and echoes, fragments of carved stone exploding around them. "You can't escape," Voss shouted over the din. "There's only one way out, and I'm standing in it." But Marcus had noticed something she hadn't, a narrow gap in the far wall, partially hidden by shadows and fallen stones. It might lead nowhere, but it was their only chance. He whistled sharply, a sound Rex knew meant immediate extraction. The dog bounded toward him as Marcus sprinted for the gap, bullets whining off the ancient stones around them. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as Voss reached their previous position. Marcus heard her curse violently behind them as they plunged into a cramped stone tunnel that angled sharply downward. The passage was barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders, and he had to crawl in places. Rex pressed close behind him. The sound of Voss trying to follow echoed from the chamber, but her curses suggested she was too large to fit through the opening easily. Cold air began to flow past them, fresh air that meant another exit. As they emerged into the howling blizzard through a concealed opening 50 yards from the hut's entrance, Marcus clutched the satchel tightly and looked back at the ancient stone structure. Whatever secrets it held, people had already died for them. But now, finally, he might have the answers that would put an end to the killing. The ancient stone walls of the hut trembled as Marcus Crane's final gunshot echoed through the mountain air. Thomas crouched behind the overturned table, his ears ringing, watching blood pool beneath the fallen man who had hunted them across 2 states. Beside him, Rex whimpered softly, his injured paw still wrapped in torn fabric from Thomas's coat. "Is he dead?" Sarah whispered from her position near the entrance, where she'd been keeping watch through a crack in the doorframe. Thomas approached Crane's motionless form carefully, the man's own weapon now heavy in Thomas's weathered hands. The gold prospector's journal lay scattered nearby, its yellowed pages mixing with fresh snow blown in through the damaged door. 3 generations of greed and violence had finally ended in this forgotten refuge that had sheltered him and Rex from the blizzard just 48 hours ago. "He's gone," Thomas confirmed, checking for a pulse. The irony wasn't lost on him that Marcus Crane would never see the fortune he'd killed for, never touch the gold that had consumed his family's legacy. The man who'd murdered Sarah's grandfather and hunted them through the wilderness had died mere feet from riches beyond imagination. Rex limped over to sniff at the leather satchel Crane had dropped, the one containing old mining documents and family photographs that had driven him to madness. Thomas gently moved the dog away, then gathered up the scattered pages of the prospector's journal. The crude map on the final page showed exactly where they were. The stone hut wasn't just a shelter, but a marker. According to the journal's faded ink, the main cache lay 30 feet directly beneath them. "Sarah," Thomas called softly. "Come look at this." She approached hesitantly, still shaken from the violence. "What is it?" "Your great-great-grandfather didn't just find gold up here. He found enough to last several lifetimes." Thomas traced the journal's diagrams with his finger. This whole area was his secret mining operation. The hut was built to mark the spot and provide shelter for anyone who might return for the gold later. Sarah stared at the journal, then at Crane's body, then at the ancient walls surrounding them. All this death, all this hunting, for what? Money? For some people, that's everything. Thomas closed the journal carefully. "The question now is what we do about it." The blizzard had finally broken during their confrontation with Crane, and weak sunlight filtered through the clearing clouds. Thomas could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors, the rescue team Sarah had contacted before their final showdown was approaching. "We could leave it buried," Sarah said quietly. "Pretend we never found the journal, never learned the truth. Let it stay hidden forever." Thomas considered this as Rex settled against his leg, the loyal dog finally able to rest. In his years of military service and subsequent life on the streets, he'd learned that some secrets were better left alone. But he'd also learned that running from truth rarely solved anything. "Or we could honor your grandfather's memory properly," he suggested. "Use what's here to help others. Veterans who need medical care, homeless families, people who've been forgotten." Sarah's eyes brightened at this possibility. "Turn something that caused so much pain into something healing? Your great-great-grandfather was a prospector, not a killer. His discovery doesn't have to be tainted by what others did in its name." Thomas looked around the hut that had saved their lives. "Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you keep, but what you're able to give away." The helicopter sounds grew louder, and Rex's ears perked up despite his exhaustion. Soon they would be rescued, returned to the world beyond these mountains. Crane's body would be removed, his violence finally ended. The authorities would ask questions that would require careful answers. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What will you do now?" Thomas smiled, scratching Rex behind the ears. I suppose that depends on whether a certain foundation dedicated to helping forgotten people might need someone who understands what it's like to have nothing. I think something could be arranged. Sarah managed her first genuine smile since the ordeal began. Someone will need to oversee the mountain operations once we start excavating properly. Someone trustworthy. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, its rotors churning the fresh snow into crystalline clouds. Thomas gathered the journal and Crane's documents, ensuring the truth would finally see daylight. Rex struggled to his feet, tail wagging weakly as he recognized the sounds of rescue. As they prepared to leave the ancient stone hut, Thomas took one last look around. This place had sheltered prospectors, protected secrets, and saved lives. Soon it would serve a new purpose, the foundation for something better than greed or violence. Outside, the rescue team was landing, their voices calling through the crisp mountain air. Thomas helped Rex toward the entrance, Sarah close behind, carrying the legacy of her grandfather's truth toward a future none of them could imagined when the blizzard first drove them to seek shelter in this forgotten place.